Hello, my name is Paul Morris, and welcome to the Roadmap Training. So this is Lesson 8, Part 1, the context, and we're going to be talking about restoration, design, and planning. So my name is Paul Morris, and I'm a restoration ecologist, and I'm a certified ecological restoration practitioner with the Society for Ecological Restoration. And I have 20 years growing on a native plant nursery and restoring ecosystems in Canada. I did 2 years as a project manager for a long hydro corridor running through Toronto. And the last 10 years I've been spending working with Resilient Ecosystems Institute, a nonprofit doing tropical restoration in the Yucatan, Mexico. So just to show you those different projects. So this was my farm in Canada. It was 95 acres or around 40 hectares. And you can see the different areas that I was working with. There's tall grass prairie that's in yellow. There's green areas that were reforested, and there's blue areas that were in wetland restoration. So, and I also had a native plant nursery, which occupied part of the area as well. I'll talk about that in a little more detail later on. And over here, you can see this is the hydro corridor that I was working on that ran through the city of Toronto. And you can see the hydro poles that are moving through there. So this whole area was turf grass, and we were restoring it to meadow ecosystem. In the Yucatan, this is our property. It's 39 hectares. And this was in cattle ranch when we first arrived here. So the area was very degraded. The trees were small, the soil was red. And gradually over time, we've been doing both naturalization and active management to restore this property. And so I'll talk about that a little more later on. And I want to kind of set the context. So this is a picture of our Earth, and this is what we call the thin blue line. And this is the sun coming up, and you can see the small area here. This is our atmosphere. Beyond that is the vacuum of space. And below that, there's a thin layer of soil. And within that thin layer of soil is where all plants and all life and all people that we know exist on this very thin line. And it just shows how fragile our existence is on this planet and how easy it is to damage this thin little line that we exist on. So understanding ecosystem components and dynamics. So ecosystems are complex and dynamic entities composed of living organisms, plants, animals, microorganisms, and their physical environment, such as soil, water, air, and climate. These components interact to form a web of relationships that sustain life. Understanding the structure and function of ecosystems is crucial for effective restoration and management. So here we can see, here's the living world, and we start out here in atoms, and then those atoms come together to form molecules. Those molecules form together to form organelles. Multiple organelles form cells, and multiple cells form tissues. Multiple tissues form organs. Multiple organs form an organism, and multiple organisms form a population of one species, and multiple species in a population, multiple populations form a community. And so the community includes, both vegetation and the animals, fungi, all the different components, and multiple communities create an ecosystem. So both the biotic and abiotic components working together. Multiple ecosystems occur within a biome, and multiple biomes occur within the biosphere. And here again, you can see that thin blue line around our biosphere that protects us. So different ecosystem components you need to understand. If you're restoring an ecosystem, you really need to understand all the components and the dynamics that are going on within the ecosystem, so that you know, okay, if something's out of balance, how do I rebalance the system? If we have no wolves, our top predator, then of course there's going to be herbivore imbalances. And if there's herbivore imbalances, then they're going to eat too much of the plants, and there's going to be imbalances in that system as well. So just thinking about that. So what we call producers, this is this layer. So these are the organisms that can photosynthesize. So we think plants and algae, different things like that. And our primary consumers are what we call herbivores. So anything that's eating the plants exclusively is a herbivore. And then we have things omnivores or carnivores. So these are species that can eat both plants and animals. And those are our omnivores. And the carnivores are the ones that only eat meat. So they're eating the flesh of other creatures. And then we have our tertiary carnivore consumers, or our top carnivores. So things like wolves, foxes, lynx, but in the Yucatan, something like a jaguar would be at the top of the chain. So in different ecosystems, you're going to have different top predators. And what they're doing is they're managing the species that are below them. So that if there's disease within the population, those animals are going to be slower, and so they're more easy prey for the predators. And so they keep those populations healthy. If they don't keep those populations healthy and reduce their numbers, then the herbivores will overeat the vegetation, and then you get a whole dynamic shifts when you remove things like top predators. If you have too many herbivores, then again, yeah, you're eating too much of the vegetation. You shift the whole balance. So understanding that balance and that dynamics that's going on to keep a healthy population, and understanding, okay, I don't have wolves in my area, or maybe I can't have wolves in the area. So maybe some sort of other active management needs to take place to replace the function that predator is doing. So ecosystem components. So I talked about ecosystems having both biotic, which are the living components, and the abiotic, which is the non-living components. The abiotic components are things like soil, water, air, climate. And here you can see the abiotic factors over here: air, salinity, soil, water, light, temperature, minerals, pH, humidity. All these things impact what sort of organisms are going to be able to survive. If there's a high salinity environment, maybe you're somewhere near the ocean, or maybe it's used to be an ocean and there's a whole bunch of salt in the soil. So what species can tolerate those particular conditions? Maybe it's very dry conditions, or maybe it's very wet conditions. You're dealing with lakes and lake shores. So all these things impact what species can grow within those conditions, and the species specialize on the variations in these different components to exist. And that's how you get your biodiversity. They're each specialized in a very specific component of being able to use all those abiotic factors and all the biotic factors. So in the next slide, we have ecosystem dynamics. So I'm just going to show you, I'll move myself over, one system. So we have many dynamic systems within our ecosystems, things like energy flow, nutrient cycling, successional processes, disturbance processes. So all these things are happening in cycles. So here we have the carbon cycle, which many of you are probably familiar with. So carbon dioxide in the atmosphere comes out of the atmosphere via photosynthesis in plants, and then animals will eat those plants and they'll release some of that carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. Some of those organisms will die, and that organic matter will go into the soil, and then fungi and bacteria might release some of that back into the atmosphere. And then through plant respiration, the plants in the nighttime, they're releasing some of that carbon dioxide as well. A lot of that carbon is stored in the soil, and that's how we get our nice black soil. If you're not storing the carbon in the soil and it's being released into the atmosphere, then you're creating an imbalance. And the imbalance that we've created is by taking all this fossil fuels, so all this organic matter over millions of years is accumulated in the soil as fossil fuels, and it's reduced the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And now we're returning that carbon dioxide by mining it all and burning it and putting the carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. And so the plants and the animals and the soils aren't able to keep up with the carbon dioxide that we're putting into the atmosphere. So we need to think about how we can revegetate and create the maximum amount of removal. So it's about rebalancing the system again. So some of the ecosystem functions, ecosystems provide a wide range of functions. Many of them are vital for human beings. So some of these things that we think about is provisioning, supplying food, water, timber, and other resources, regulating, climate regulation, water purification, flood control, disease regulation. There's cultural aspects, recreational, aesthetic, and spiritual benefits. Supporting soil formation, nutrient cycling, and primary production. So here you can see all the different ecosystem services. The services are what impacts human beings. So these are all things that ecosystems do for free and that we're damaging and we're destroying. Up to this point in the Earth's life, all these services were done for free for human beings. But now we've cleared the land so much and we've thrown chemicals into the oceans and into the soils and into the air. And so we've damaged the ecosystem functions and the services that are being given to us, the food, the clean water, the plants, the animals, all these things that are resources that we're using them too quickly. So we need to figure out how to rebalance the system so that those functions can exist again. And restoring ecosystems is an important part of restoring the ecosystem functions. So when I say functions is about all creatures on the planet. When we say ecosystem services, we're thinking just about human beings and what they can do for us. So it's a very anthropocentric viewpoint. So I prefer functions. So some of the human impacts that we're having on the planet, human activities that profoundly altered ecosystems, leading to habitat loss, pollution, climate change, and biodiversity decline. And biodiversity decline, to me, is one of the most important things that needs to be dealt with. Understanding these impacts is essential for developing effective restoration strategies. So some of the things that we're working with is, drying out swamps and turning them into agriculture, deforestation, plowing, grazing, urban construction, pollution, poaching, dam construction, hunting, overfishing, animal skins, tropical fish trade, climate change, death by vehicles, wild animal trade, and bird trade. So all of these things are impacting on biodiversity loss. Now, how do we stop them? When you're working on a project, you look at, what are the different things that are impacting that site? How do I minimize the impact? How do I stop the impact so that the biodiversity can recover on that site? So some of the key principles of ecosystem restoration. So restoring ecosystems requires a deep understanding of their components, dynamics, and the impacts of human activities. Some of the key principles: holistic approach, considering the entire ecosystem, including its biotic and abiotic components, the interactions, and all the different processes that are involved. Adaptive management, so you're using monitoring and feedback to adjust your restoration strategies based on changing conditions and new information. You try something out and you see if it works. And if it doesn't work, it's like, okay, well, why did that plant die? Maybe I need to do something different. Maybe I need to add some biochar. Maybe I need to add some other nutrients to help that plant grow and to establish it. Even just adding water to the system. How do I hold more water in the system so those plants survive? Community involvement, so engaging local communities in restoration efforts helps to ensure the long-term success and sustainability. For example, on my property, when I first bought this property, the 40 hectares in the Yucatan, I went around to the different neighbors and I talked to them. They're running their cows through the property. And so I asked them, please don't run your cows on our property. It's damaging the ecosystem and we're trying to do something different. And so they fixed their fences and they've kept their cattle out for the most part. Science-based strategies, so applying scientific knowledge and methods to design and implement effective restoration projects. But you also have to think of what's called two-eyed seeing. So there's indigenous knowledge So knowledge that is within that local area, the native species, how to work with them. And then there's the scientific aspect. So maybe you have some anecdotal evidence, and then you have the scientific evidence to say, you know, oh, this is why it's actually working. You do this practice, and this is why it works. And this practice will actually work specifically in the local area, or this is a practice that we can take and adapt to different areas all around the globe. So without that scientific understanding of why it's working, you may know it's working, but you don't understand the processes. So you need that scientific approach as well. So thank you. That's part one. And we'll continue in the next section.